In the hallway leading to the dining room, a board member casually brushed past Danielle's arm and muttered under his breath, "You're a smart cookie, but don't think your kind belongs at this table." His words landed like a slap. Danielle's fingers tightened around her glass. She felt every eye turn, every heartbeat echo. In that moment, she realized that wealth and whiteness had cobbled together a fortress, with her brilliance merely a token garnish. But she would not shrink. She tilted her chin, held his gaze, and raised her glass. If you've ever faced prejudice in a powerful room, drop a comment below, hit subscribe, and ring the bell, because you're about to witness how one CEO turned condescension into her greatest triumph. Danielle emerged from the sleek black SUV onto the gravel drive of the Bington estate, just as the late afternoon sun glinted off marble columns. Each step toward the great white facade felt like crossing an invisible line from the world she had built out of grit and code into the fortress of old money. She adjusted the collar of her slate gray blazer, reminding herself that here, substance counted more than flash. Charles Bington met her at the door with a polished grin and outstretched arm. "Danielle, welcome." His voice was warm, but his eyes appraised her as though she were an exhibit in his private collection. Behind him, Victoria stood in a champagne-colored suit, stiff, reserved as though her outfit cost more than Danielle's wardrobe by a country mile. "I trust your journey was comfortable," Victoria said, voice flawless. Danielle allowed herself a polite nod. The foyer's scent of lemon polish and cold marble felt like a trial by fire, spotless, silent, disciplined. A Latina attendant in a crisp uniform whisked away Danielle's leather bag, leaving her alone among curated art and the faint hum of unseen staff. Charles began pointing out sculptures and architectural flourishes, but Danielle's mind remained on the prize, a $500 million merger that could accelerate Neurospace's mission. Yet every polished corner whispered the same warning: she was welcome here only on their terms. She noticed the subtle tension as Charles and Victoria led her toward the grand staircase. Their west wing housed other guests, but they'd put her in the east for privacy. Danielle's eyes lingered on Victoria's forced smile before she climbed the stairs, pausing at a floor-to-ceiling window. The ocean beyond stretched gray and restless, mirroring her own unease. In her guest suite, the silence was curated as carefully as the furniture. Beige walls, glass tables, no personal touches, space designed for show, not for life. Danielle set her suitcase on the bed and let the hush settle, recalling nights in cramped apartments fueled by takeout and determination. Here the shadows felt longer, the quiet louder. She rubbed her palms together as Clark, the assistant, knocked with details for dinner at 7 formal board members, friends of the family. Danielle shook her head. "I'll be fine," she said, though Clark's sideways glance told her he wondered if she truly belonged in this silent palace. She checked her reflection. Her navy sheath dress spoke of strength, not spectacle. She smoothed her hair into a low bun, then left the room, heels clicking down hallways that smelled of power. In the dining room's vast expanse, candlelight flickered against the sea's darkening silhouette. A long mahogany table awaited 20 guests. Name cards were an afterthought. Charles strode forward, introducing her as our guest of honor, his voice booming. Polite applause rattled like a formality. Victoria ushered Danielle to a seat halfway down, visible but not central. The board's sons lounged at the head, sipping scotch and smugness, while Danielle's glass of wine arrived without fanfare. Across the table, a young heir in a tailored tuxedo tipped his head. "Neurospace." "We thought you were in media," he said with a grin. Danielle pressed her lips into a tight smile and corrected him. "Yes, defense, healthcare, finance." His surprise stung less than the assumption. A board member halfway down praised her modern, sharp presence like she was a color sample. Danielle met her glass, steadying her breath. When an older man suggested she was a diversity hire, she let it pass, but her silence was no concession. Plates clinked. Laughter rolled from the head of the table where Charles held court. Danielle felt the weight of every amused glance. She sipped water, logging each slight in her mind, a ledger of microaggressions disguised as compliments. Midway through dessert, she rose. No announcement, no fury, just calm certainty. "Excuse me," she said, voice clear. She walked out, heels echoing down the stone corridor, leaving puzzled laughter in her wake. In a guest powder room lined with chrome, she exhaled the tension and locked the door. Her phone buzzed. I'm reconsidering everything, she typed back. Tonight she would dine with them again, as planned. But by morning, she would have made a new plan, one born from the reminder that her value wasn't up for debate in a room full of doubters. Danielle Given didn't need their validation. She would redefine the terms herself. The sky above East Hampton hung heavy with gunmetal clouds as Danielle followed Victoria through the echoing halls of the Bington estate. Each step on the polished marble felt magnified, her high heels a metronome, announcing each heartbeat. The walls, seamlessly white, seemed to absorb her presence, leaving only the faint click of her shoes and the soft rustle of Victoria's champagne silk skirt in their wake. In the distance, the ocean's horizon wavered under the low-hanging clouds, as though the weather itself understood the storm gathering over Danielle's weekend. Victoria paused before a pair of double doors carved from pale oak. She turned smile, perfectly practiced, and touched Danielle's elbow. "We've arranged for you to stay in the East Wing," she said. "More privacy, you know. Other guests will be in the West Wing." Danielle inclined her head, tracing Victoria's words without surprise. Privacy in the old money lexicon often meant separation. She'd anticipated the social choreography, a parade of pleasantries, carefully managed optics, and a single spotlight reserved for Bington prestige. Yet here, amid the estate's hush, she felt like a museum exhibit to be observed from afar, appreciated from a distance, never allowed to touch. "Thank you, Victoria," she replied evenly. The room behind the doors was vast floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking manicured hedges and barren of warmth. A leather chaise faced the glass, its surface unblemished, as though no one had ever sat there to watch the tide roll in. A narrow writing desk stood against the far wall, its surface empty save for a single piece of stationery embossed with the Bington crest. Danielle set down her small leather bag, unzipping it to reveal her laptop and a neatly folded navy sheath dress. Nothing in her repertoire of emergency plans had prepared her for the emptiness of a space designed to feel grand, but never lived in. Her phone buzzed a discreet tremor against the hard surface of the desk. She opened her CFO's message. "The air is already thick. Trust your instincts." Danielle closed her eyes for a heartbeat, recalling cramped Silicon Valley apartments, littered with whiteboards, takeout boxes, and her late-night schematics for decision-making algorithms. Here, even the furniture seemed curated for display, not for dwelling. The afternoon crawled forward with choreographed precision. A soft knock at the door revealed Clark, the family's assistant, backlit in a navy suit that strained against his slender frame. He offered a silver tray with tea and biscuits. "Afternoon refreshment." "Miss Given," he said, eyes flicking downward. Danielle accepted a cup of Earl Grey and managed a small nod. Clark lingered a moment, then retreated without another word, the door closing with a sigh that felt too loud in the austere room. Danielle sipped the tea, its warmth a fleeting comfort. She wandered to the window and watched the tide churn shoals of foam sliding beneath distant sailboats. The guests, whoever they were, would soon fill the West Wing with laughter and clinking glasses. She imagined the drive from San Jose, her team cheering as they finalized the $500 million equity infusion, the promises of expanded R&D global distribution networks humming to life. And yet here she was on the fringes of the family weekend, a marquee name afforded all the privileges of a guest, but none of the belonging. A chime in the hall announced her next engagement. She smoothed her skirt and followed Clark down a wide staircase, the air growing warmer as they entered a vast library lined with leather-bound volumes. There Charles Bington stood, in conversation with an older couple, their chatter soft and intimate. He turned at Danielle's approach, his face a mask of practiced charm. "Danielle." He greeted, extending his hand. His grip was firm, his smile bright. "I'm so glad you could join us." Behind his eyes, however, she detected a flicker of calculation, an assessment of how she fit in like a piece on an old money chessboard. She returned the handshake, her fingers steady. "Thank you for inviting me, Charles." He gestured toward the bookshelves. "Please help yourselves to anything that interests you before dinner. We've arranged for some of our board members to meet you in informal settings." Informal, she thought, would mean separate. Invitations neatly uttered, but boundaries firmly set. The couple drained their glasses and excused themselves, leaving Danielle and Charles alone among dusty tomes of leather and gilt. He offered her a glass of pale white wine. She accepted but refrained from sipping. Tomorrow's brunch with the shareholders should be enlightening, he said, sliding a stack of brochures across the table, glossy pamphlets showcasing Neurospace's achievements alongside Bington philanthropic projects. It was a delicate overture unity on paper edges left deliberately ragged. Danielle scanned the pamphlet's images, children in science labs, elderly patients benefiting from AI diagnostics, her own face smiling from a front-page magazine. She inhaled slowly, acknowledging the PR machine already churning. "I appreciate the opportunity to share our vision," she said, her voice calm but firm. Charles nodded. "Our families may come from different worlds, but the future requires partnership." He paused, studying her. "And it's rare to find an innovator with both the intelligence and the grace to lead." Danielle allowed the compliment a moment of space before responding. "Grace is tested by how one treats those they perceive as lesser." She didn't elaborate, but her statement hung there charged. Charles's smile faltered just for a fraction before he recovered. "Yes, of course," he said, voice measured. "I look forward to proving that our hospitality is as genuine as our intentions." Dinner that evening took place in a grand hall, long table, set with crystal and silver. Danielle found her seat halfway down, flanked by distant cousins of the Bington lineage and a rotating cast of board members. Victoria moved among the guests, pouring champagne, orchestrating introductions. From her vantage, Danielle watched the ritual exchange of pleasantries. "How do you find the estate? Is the weather agreeable? We hear Neurospace is on the verge of something spectacular." Each inquiry carefully neutral, polite, yet improbably empty. As plates of seared scallops and truffled risotto circulated, Danielle detected the subtext. An executive in a bespoke tuxedo leaned close. "Dad says so many women in tech lack stability. How do you maintain focus?" Danielle met his gaze, emotion fluid behind her steady eyes. "Focus thrives on principle," she replied. "When your mission is clear, distractions fade." He blinked, taken aback by the directness, and hurried to redefine himself as an ally. The people nearest the head of the table nodded along, smiles polite but thin. Danielle noted the seating pattern winners clustered at the head, those deemed valuable enough for optics sprinkled like confetti further down. No one here expected Danielle to challenge the order of things, only to confirm their assumptions of novelty. After dinner, Victoria excused Danielle for rest, claiming a tight schedule for Sunday's PR ceremonies. She steered Danielle toward the library's adjacent lounge, a cozy enclave of velvet sofas and a grand piano. "You should relax," Victoria murmured. "Tomorrow is so important." She lingered, adjusting Danielle's hair at the nape before stepping back. "You'll do wonderfully." She offered, her tone a blend of warmth and expectation. "Just be yourself." Danielle stifled a sigh. Always she said, her voice neutral, yet the words felt hollow, rehearsed. She watched Victoria's retreating back, questioning whether being herself was enough when the rules here were written in unspoken privilege. Upstairs, the East Wing corridor greeted her with silent opulence, pale carpets, recessed lighting, and doors bearing brass nameplates except for Danielle's, which simply read Guest Suite. No family crest, no prestige. She paused at its threshold and inhaled, steadying herself for another night in a room that offered every amenity but none of the genuine connection she'd fought to build at Neurospace. Inside, she slid off her heels and sank onto the leather chaise. Her phone buzzed again, another message from her CFO. "Check the shareholders list." Some new names appeared overnight. Danielle frowned and typed back, "I'll review it in the morning." Even here behind these walls, her mind spun with contingencies. She replayed the evening's moments, the flippant remark about women in tech, the forced smiles, the arrangement of chairs that whispered rank. As she turned off the bedside lamp, the room plunged into darkness, save for the dim glow of streetlights filtering through the curtains. The estate's hush enveloped her, but instead of comfort, she felt the weight of watchful eyes. In her mind, she began drafting the conversation she'd have at brunch with every shareholder who believed they controlled her destiny. She would match their condescension with conviction, edge their ignorance with insight. Outside, thunder rumbled across the Atlantic, a distant warning that the weekend's calm might shatter at any moment. Danielle closed her eyes, letting the rhythm of the storm settle her nerves. The undercurrent of unease, the fine veneer of hospitality tinged with privilege, would not go unanswered. She had come here to finalize a merger, but she would prove that respect could not be bought with champagne and gold-trimmed invitations. In the darkness of the Bington estate's east wing, Danielle Renee. Given lay awake ready to navigate the weekend's meticulously arranged rituals. The air was thick with unspoken tests and veiled expectations, but she wore her slate-gray blazer like armor. Tomorrow, when the shareholders gathered over brunch, she would lean into the undercurrent, unmask their condescension, and remind them that genuine partnership required more than pedigree and polished smiles. It required seeing her not as a token guest, but as an equal visionary, no matter how heavy the clouds that lingered overhead. The doors to the dining hall swung open on gleaming hinges, and Danielle stepped into a chamber designed to stun. Candlelight flickered off towering crystal chandeliers, casting diamond-bright halos on the polished mahogany table that stretched further than her gaze could follow. Velvet draperies framed arched windows beyond which the gray Atlantic churned under an angry sky. She felt the hush settle around her as Charles Bington rose, glass of scotch in hand, his smile broad and practiced. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, voice echoing, "tonight we celebrate the future neurospace under the brilliant leadership of Danielle Given." Applause rippled through the room, polite and measured like the rustle of expensive fabrics. Danielle offered a small nod of acknowledgement, her back ramrod straight, but she noticed immediately that she'd been seated halfway down the table. Heads of companies, board members, and Bington scions filled the seats closer to Charles. Danielle's place was conspicuous only by its distance. Victoria appeared at her side, guiding her to a seat between a daughter of a long-ago partner wreathed in pearls and a hedge fund manager in loafers. The woman carved a smile of welcome before sliding a glass of pale white wine toward Danielle. The manager gave a curt nod, his designer sneakers flashing beneath the table. Danielle bowed her thanks, but did not touch the wine. She'd sworn off distractions this weekend. As guests settled, the soft clink of silverware began. The first course arrived seared scallops on a bed of microgreens. Yet the sumptuous flavors felt muted as she listened to the hum of conversation around her. To her left, a gentleman in a tailored tuxedo leaned in interest bubbling in his eyes. "So you're the genius Charles flew in," he said with a grin, voice low. "Neurospace, that AI and whatever." "Am I close?" Danielle offered him a crisp smile. "We build decision systems for autonomous data processing across defense, healthcare, and finance." He blinked, startled. "Oh. Right," he said, recovering. "Impressive." He waved a hand at the room. "We thought you were in media. Your presence, it suits a spotlight." Danielle tilted her head slightly, studying him. "Our work rarely courts the paparazzi," she replied evenly. He opened his mouth, but thought better of speaking. A luncheon plate scraped in the background as the board member to her right, a silver-haired woman with sharp eyes, cleared her throat. "Stanford." "Was it?" the woman said, voice sweet as honey. "Such prestige. The unspoken message hung in the air. We didn't expect you to have earned your seat." Danielle met her gaze directly. "Yes, thank you." The woman's smile tightened, lips thinning as she turned back to her soup. Danielle felt a heat rise behind her calm facade. The ornamental plant in the center of the table seemed to wink in her direction, mocking the pretense. The guest next to the Stanford woman leaned in. "You know," he said, "Dad says it's good to get some color into the portfolio. Modern, sharp." He gestured at Danielle's slate-gray dress as though examining paint samples. His companion laughed a polite chirp that grated like a fingernail on the table's surface. Danielle pressed her lips together and lifted her water glass. She sipped, feeling the cool liquid steady her pulse. "I'm not an asset class," she said softly, tone neutral. The pair's smiles flickered but remained intact. The conversation shifted to market forecasts, leaving her comment hovering between them unanswered. A hush fell as the main course was served. Roasted duck with truffle juice, and the men at the far end of the table launched into stories about oil deals and luxury yachts. They laughed easily, their voices comfortable with the assumption of power. Richard Bington, Charles's eldest son, regaled them with a tale of a recent boardroom coup. "We had to remind her who wore the pants," he said, chuckling. "She's a nice kid, but we run serious business here." Danielle's knuckles whitened around her fork. The broadcast of disrespect was so blatant it felt corrosive. Yet she held her fork aloft and took a deliberate bite, masking her seething behind a delicate chew. Across from her, the man in the tuxedo raised an eyebrow, as though he'd tuned in just in time to catch the punchline. Danielle maintained her composure, meeting his gaze with the equanimity of someone who knew both the joke and the context. At the table's head, Charles raised his glass. To partnership, he intoned, "May our collaboration prove fruitful." Glasses clinked. Danielle lifted hers too, the cool crystal solid in her hand. To partnership, she repeated, voice clear. The word tasted bitter. The conversation resumed, each morsel of small talk a test of her patience. The pearls-wearing matron tapped her spoon against her salad. "You have such courage," she said softly, as though confessing a secret. Danielle's eyes narrowed fractionally. "Courage," she echoed. "Yes," the woman said, leaning forward. "To step into a world so different, it must take a certain temperament." She smiled, a mixture of praise and pity. Danielle set her water glass on the table and met the woman's gaze without apology. "Temperament is often a veil for bias," she replied. A pin dropped. The woman glanced at her neighbor's, uncertainty flickering across her features. Before the tension could thicken, a waiter appeared with dessert, a lemon tart glistening with candied zest. The men to Danielle's left pounced on their second glasses of scotch. Danielle allowed a moment's reflection. The table's choreography, applause for brilliance, compliments tinged with condescension, the repeated reminders that she was an outsider had all been intended to test her, and she had managed to pass with poise. But endurance, she knew, was not surrender. She laid down her fork and rose to her feet, the table's rippling conversations dimming as heads turned in surprise. No one understood what she intended, and that was exactly how she wanted it. She smoothed the front of her dress and spoke with a clarity that filled every corner of the vaulted room. "Thank you," she said, voice steady, "but I'm afraid I must take my leave." She paused, letting the hush settle. "Good night." Then, without waiting for permission, she turned on her heel and walked out, her heels clicking in measured rhythm down the hallway. Behind her, a swirl of startled murmurs chased her, retreating back. She did not look back. The polished dining hall, its candelabra chandeliers, its gleaming table, its ledger of elitist rituals faded behind her. As she reached the staircase and descended into the house's heart, her jaw remained set, her mind clear. Respect, she knew, was not bestowed by seating arrangements or spun compliments. It was earned, and it could not be negotiated in a room full of veiled tests. When she arrived back in her suite, the silence greeted her like an old friend. She closed the door, leaning against its cool wood. In the stillness, the faint thunder of ocean waves reached her ears, a reminder that nature bowed to no privilege. She sank onto the chaise, her phone buzzing once more. "Talk soon." It was her CFO, and Danielle typed back 2 words. "Soon. Change coming." She placed the phone aside and allowed herself a single breath of release. The weekend's formalities had begun with a celebration of her achievements, but the evening's microaggressions had made it clear that the Bingtons saw her brilliance only as a prop. She settled back, the lethargy of feigned hospitality lifting from her shoulders. Tomorrow she would attend brunch as planned. But her departure from that table marked a turning point. No longer would she play a bit part in their narrative. She would write her own chapter and make them follow her lead. The dining room was bathed in the soft glow of candlelight, the sea's dark horizon a silent witness through floor-to-ceiling windows. Danielle walked in behind Victoria, her heels sinking gently into the thick carpet before she found her seat halfway down the mahogany table. The table stretched on in both directions like a runway, heads of family, and board members at the far end, a serious procession of formality and power. Danielle's chair, elegant yet unadorned, felt like a deliberate statement she was welcomed but not central. To her left, a man in a bespoke tuxedo and pristine designer sneakers leaned back, surveying the room with casual entitlement. To her right, a board member's wife in pearls and silk whispered to her companion, her voice too soft to catch any meaning. Waiters moved in silent choreography, bringing courses of seared scallops gilded with microgreens, fine linens, whispering under silverware. Charles Bington rose at the head of the table, glass of scotch in hand. "Let us toast our guest of honor," he began, his voice measured and theatrical. "Miss Danielle Given, brilliant innovator, visionary CEO, and the future of tech." A polite applause rippled around the table. Danielle offered a nod and a calm smile. The tribute felt like a photo op, warm but only surface deep. Glasses clinked, and the meal began. The first course arrived velvety butternut squash bisque, crowned with a swirl of creme fraiche. Conversations bubbled forth exports to Asia oil prices' charitable foundations. Danielle sipped slowly, feeling each flavor as an anchor to ground her in reality. When her neighbors finally turned toward her, she met their gazes directly. A board member with a shock of silver hair offered, "Your background is so remarkable, Danielle. You bring such a fresh perspective." His tone was polished, but the subtext was clear, fresh, like produce sampled from the market, a novelty rather than a seasoned competitor. Danielle set down her spoon. "Thank you," she said evenly. "Diversity of thought is what drives innovation." He chuckled lightly, nodding as though conceding. "Indeed, we're adding color to the portfolio, aren't we?" He smiled as if daring her to correct him. Around the table, a few guests laughed polite, rehearsed laughter. Danielle sensed the undercurrent. She was appreciated for optics, not equally valued for substance. Another board member, a well-dressed woman in her late 50s, leaned forward. "Tell me, dear, how do you manage the pressure?" She lowered her voice conspiratorially. "I've heard women in leadership roles can be temperamental." The word hung in the air like an accusation. Danielle paused a slow inhale. "Temperament," she replied, "is often a euphemism for passion. I find that passion scales well when your mission is clear." The woman's eyebrows lifted in surprise. She swirled her wine and sat back, nodding tentatively, as though unsure whether she'd overstepped or learned something. Danielle's heart pounded with the familiar burn of indignation, but her face remained an immovable mask of composure. Across the table, a younger man with sleek dark hair and a finely trimmed beard raised his glass. "You know," he said, tone casual, "I told Charles it's bold of him to bring in some female leadership. Modernizes the image shows we're progressive." He winked, expecting a laugh. Danielle met his eyes squarely. "I didn't come here to modernize your image," she said, voice quiet but firm. "I came here to build the future." A hush fell over that side of the table before murmurs of amusement and surprise rippled back. Danielle turned her attention to the far end where Charles watched the exchange with unreadable eyes. Victoria, seated nearby, offered an apologetic smile, her shoulders tight. Danielle detected the tension in the room, an awkward charge of conflict between expected deference and new authority. The second course, filet mignon with a red wine reduction, arrived. Danielle took a small bite, letting the rich flavor settle her nerves. She noted the intricate pattern of the silverware and the way the candles flickered, casting dancing shadows across crystal glasses. Each person's face was illuminated momentarily, revealing curiosity, skepticism, or simply polite interest. A board member in a navy blazer, older stoic, cleared his throat and addressed the group. "Well, it's not every day we see a young CEO break through so quickly." He tapped his fork against his glass. "How do you plan to balance innovation with stability?" His gaze flicked toward Danielle as though testing her resolve. Danielle set down her fork. "Stability," she said, "is a byproduct of consistent vision and accountability. At Neurospace, we measure success by outcomes and integrity, not just by share price." The man's lips pressed together and he nodded slowly, as though evaluating her sincerity. Around the table, forks paused in midair, guests listening, reevaluating, adjusting their impressions. Danielle felt a small victory. Her words had shifted the conversation from optics back to substance. A woman across from her, not a Bington, but a longtime investor, leaned forward and spoke in a softer tone. "I admire your directness," she said, offering a genuine smile. "It's rare." Danielle returned the smile, sensing an ally in the unexpected. This moment shimmered a crack in the polished facade where real connection could bloom. As the main course concluded and the waiters prepared the dessert, lavender creme brulee, Charles stood again, glass raised. "To new horizons," he proclaimed. The table complied, yet the new felt precarious, uncertain. Danielle, holding her glass, considered her position halfway between head and foot of the table. Her presence, as symbolic as her seat, was deliberate. The final test arrived when Gregory Bington, Charles's son, slid into the chair beside her unexpectedly. He poured himself more wine without invitation. "Danielle," he said, voice low, "my father's thrilled with your work, but there are whispers about whether you can handle the high-pressure environment." He leaned in, voice conspiratorial. "Passion can turn volatile, you know. It's best to keep things steady. Danielle turned her eyes to him, her reflection caught in the polished silver of her fork. Let me ask you a question, Gregory, she said softly. If I were a middle-aged white man in an expensive fleece jacket, would anyone question my temperament? His grin flickered as the question landed. I'm just saying what the board's concerned about, he stammered. Around them, forks stilled, and a few guests glanced over, caught between curiosity and discomfort. Danielle allowed a quiet moment of silence to stretch the tension like a held breath in the room. Then she rose, the soft rustle of her dress underscoring her movement. No announcement, no dramatics, just calm authority. Excuse me, she said. She turned on her heel and walked away, leaving stunned silence in her wake. A few calls for her to return trailed behind, but Danielle proceeded down the hallway without looking back. In the corridor's solitude, she leaned against a pane of frost-etched glass, exhaled, and checked her phone. I'm reconsidering everything, she typed to Shauna. Then she straightened her shoulders, smoothed her dress, and returned to the dining room. She took her seat without fuss or apology, her posture unshakable. The remaining course arrived delicate pastries and a sharp espresso, and the atmosphere shifted as Danielle accepted the space she had reclaimed. By the time the meal ended, hushed conversations were already weaving through the guests' whispers about her poise, speculation on her reactions, unease at their own assumptions. Danielle rose again to depart, offering a courteous nod to Charles and Victoria. Thank you for a memorable evening, she said, her voice composed. I'll see you at brunch. As she walked away, the flickering candlelight reflected in her mind like a warning. The real work at this table was not in the courses served, but in the conversations corrected. And Danielle Given, seated halfway down the mahogany table, had just reminded them that brilliance wasn't a garnish, it was the main course. Danielle rose from her place at the table with the quiet precision of a dancer leaving the stage mid-performance. The low murmur of dinner conversation rippled around her, but she navigated the room as if guided by an inner compass. Every footstep measured her spine straight, the slate-gray hem of her dress skimming the plush carpet. She slipped past the silk-clad board members and the daughters in pearls without a glance, her expression serene yet unyielding, and ascended the grand staircase that curved like a polished wave toward the house's upper floors. At the landing, she paused by a narrow corridor framed with silver sconces whose lights flickered softly against white plaster. The hush here felt almost reverent. She moved toward the guest bathroom, its door marked simply with an elegant script powder room. She touched the ornate brass handle and stepped inside, closing and locking the door behind her. Immediately, the clash of the formal dining hall, its polite laughter, the clink of china faded to a distant echo. The hushed solidity of the room enveloped her like a cloak. Inside the guest bathroom was an oasis of marble and chrome, a broad vanity carved from Carrara stone underlit with warm LEDs that threw gentle highlights across a row of faucets. A single orchid in a glass vase stood sentinel by the basin, its petals a splash of color in this curated neutrality. Danielle crossed to the mirror, standing tall, her chest rising beneath the crisp lines of her blouse. She gazed at her reflection eyes, steady lips pressed into a line of determination. The board member's backhanded temperament comment still echoed in her mind, but she refused to let it crack her composure. She retrieved her phone from her clutch and tapped open a message to her CFO, Shauna Kim. The screen glowed. I'm reconsidering everything. She hit send before second-guessing herself and slipped the phone back into her bag. The brief tremor of vulnerability passed through her chest, but she exhaled the tension, letting it dissolve like mist on polished stone. Leaning closer to the mirror, she studied the contours of her face. The high cheekbones, the steady gaze, the quiet strength that belied years of late nights and relentless code sprints. No tear threatened the surface. Instead, she felt an electric calm like the stillness before a storm. Her hands came up to adjust the collar of her dress, as though putting on armor, each slight movement reinforcing her resolve. A soft click outside the door sounded the family's assistant making his rounds. Danielle's heart skipped, but she maintained perfect poise. She straightened her posture one last time, smoothing the fabric at her waist, and nodded to her reflection with the faintest of smiles. Then, as silently as she had arrived, she unlocked the door and stepped back into the corridor. Walking down toward the dining room, she felt the house's energy shift as though its walls recognized her quiet defiance. The scent of lemon polish and expensive cologne curled in the air. She passed the lounge where Charles and Victoria stood, greeting late arrivals. They offered her formal nods, their expressions polite but unreadable. Danielle acknowledged them with a cool smile, a single pivot of her head, and continued onward. Re-entering the dining hall, she paused briefly at the threshold, letting her presence register. The heads of state and industry turned toward her in unison, their smiles faltering at the unexpected return. A slice of lemon tart rested untouched at her place. Danielle slipped into her chair as though she had never left. The linens whispered against the sleeves of her gown, and the candlelight cast a soft glow that danced across her features. The gentleman in designer sneakers raised an eyebrow mid-conversation with the board member who'd questioned her temperament. Their whispered exchange halted. The tuxedoed son shifted uncomfortably, as though his footing on this carefully constructed social stage had just been unsettled. Danielle caught their glances, held her own, and turned her attention to the hostess beside her. Victoria offered her a glass of red wine, an unspoken gesture of inclusion. "Everything all right?" Victoria's voice was low, sympathetic, but Danielle responded with a firmness that brooked no pity. "Perfect," she said. "Thank you." She lifted the glass to her lips, letting the rich aroma swirl before a single, deliberate sip. Conversations resumed around her, but now the cadence had changed. The board member's wife avoided direct eye contact, shifting uneasily to the person next to her. A guest half a table away offered Danielle a genuine smile when their eyes met a subtle acknowledgement of solidarity. Plates of dark chocolate mousse emerged, and Danielle tasted the first spoonful, its bittersweet notes grounding her in the moment. Across the table, Gregory Bington attempted another quip this time, about keeping things steady, but Danielle met his words with a polite nod, then turned her gaze to the head of the table. Charles's confident posture wavered for an instant as he realized that his intended cues of control were failing. The polished armor of wealth and lineage had dents, and Danielle's quiet resistance had struck a blow. The remainder of the meal passed in a blur of subtle shifts and newly tempered tones. Menu cards were laid aside, and the candles burned lower as the guests pondered the power dynamics rebalanced in real time. What had been a choreographed display of hospitality became an unscripted revelation of individual agency. Danielle navigated the exchange of final toasts and a closing round of applause, with tranquil grace collecting the last vestiges of her borrowed wine. When the dessert plates were cleared and the candles guttered to soft embers, Danielle rose once more, this time for the final time. Her chair slid back and she stood, offering a composed nod to Charles and Victoria. "Thank you for a memorable evening," she said, her voice quiet, yet carrying through the hush. No lingering words of apology, no forced warmth, just a poised exit that spoke volumes. She passed through the dining hall's archway, her silhouette framed by the soft glow of candlelit chandeliers. Behind her, the Bington guests settled into uneasy murmurs, their meticulously arranged weekend rewritten by her refusal to be a passive participant. Danielle retraced her steps through the echoing corridors past the library, the entry hall, and finally back to her suite. Once inside, she closed the door and leaned against it, exhaling fully. The porcelain walls seemed to breathe with her, their rigid perfection softened by her return. She retrieved her phone, scanning replies from Shauna. "Let's discuss tomorrow," and from an investor. "Never seen anything like it." She allowed herself a small private smile. Danielle moved to the window and looked out at the restless ocean, its surface lit by the pale glow of the storm-laden moon. The waves crashed against the shore with relentless power, nature's untamed reminder that raw force need not be loud to be effective. Danielle stood a moment longer, gathering that quiet strength. Tomorrow's brunch awaited, and the shareholders would gather expecting the same rehearsed performance. But tonight Danielle had reclaimed her agency. The weekend's script had been rewritten in her favor, not by grand gestures, but by refusing to swallow the small indignities that concealed bigger truths. Her resolve had solidified each act of quiet resistance, sharpening her purpose like steel in a forge. Turning from the window, she prepared for bed, her mind already drafting the narrative she would share at breakfast, one that would honor her integrity and redefine what true partnership meant. The storm outside raged on thunder, rolling across the estate, but Danielle remained serene, her resolve unbroken. The quiet resistance of the night was only the beginning. By dawn, the Bington estate would know that underestimating her had been their first and most significant mistake. The neon sign outside flickered in pink and teal as Danielle pulled into the gravel parking lot of the roadside diner, its chrome facade half hidden by overgrown hedges. She killed the engine and sat for a moment, the taillights casting ruby pools on the loose stones. Inside, the hiss of the neon bled through the windshield. "Welcome back," painted in retro cursive, and she braced herself for what came next. Behind her dark sunglasses, her eyes tracked the uneasy swell of emotion. She refused to acknowledge a combustible mix of indignation, determination, and an unmistakable spark of righteous anger. Pushing the door open, she stepped into a realm of cracked leather booths and formica tables. The diner's hum was low and warm, the clink of silverware, the murmur of late-night patrons, the sizzle of grease on the flat-top grill. A waitress in a faded name tag, Cindy glanced up from the counter where she was wiping down stools. "Back again?" "Miss Given?" Cindy asked, voice rich with curiosity. Danielle offered a polite nod and pointed toward the booth in the corner. Cindy led her down the aisle past a family eating pie and two young men nursing coffees until she slid into the back booth beside a small table lamp that cast a golden halo over its square of cracked vinyl. Moments later, Elliot Miles slipped in opposite her. He wore a charcoal suit that had seen better days, its shoulders soft from years of courtroom battles. A folder peeked from his briefcase, and he set it on the table with a slight sigh. "You've got guts coming here at this hour," he said, voice low, leaning forward so his words wouldn't drift. Danielle placed her leather tote on the seat and retrieved a slim flash drive wrapped in a bit of electrical tape, an unassuming capsule of revolution. "It's time," she said, sliding it across the table. The overhead fluorescent lights flickered, making the drive look like it glowed. Elliot's eyebrows rose and he varied his grip on the briefcase as if securing a lifeline. "What have you got for me?" he asked, opening the briefcase and removing a legal pad and pen. Danielle exhaled slowly. "Everything we've gathered these past weeks. Unseemly bonuses authorized by Wexler while meal stipends were cut for janitors. Safety violations ignored. Boardroom audio of executives mocking frontline staff jokes about how the janitor just pretended to work." She paused, letting each accusation land. "I want an emergency shareholder meeting within 24 hours. I want notice served before dawn. We reset the board's agenda. Write me in as acting chair." Elliot placed the flash drive on the page of his legal pad, snapping it open to reveal the grid of blank lines awaiting his script. "We have the authority under Section 4.2 of the operating agreement," he murmured, pen hovering. "Majority shareholder can call an extraordinary meeting. We'll need notice to each director and the corporate secretary, and we'll specify an agenda vote of no confidence in the CEO election of new directors your appointment." Danielle nodded. "Exactly. And not a word to anyone else. We want them blindsided. They think they've corralled me with dinners and polite apathy. They think I'm compliant. Let's make sure the first they hear of this is when they read it on their desks." Elliot's pen touched paper, the scratch of ink like a fuse being lit. "I'll draft the notice clear, concise, undeniable. We'll cite evidence board slides, bonus memos, audio timestamps. You'll sign as majority shareholder. We'll serve the notice to the registered agent, the secretary, and directly to each director's corporate email." Danielle studied his hand moving swiftly across the page, translating her strategy into legalese. The diner's booth felt both intimate and conspiratorial, far removed from the marble halls where she'd been tested. Outside, the rain began to patter against the windows in soft chords, as though nature itself was on her side. "Anything else?" Elliot asked, head up at last. "We need to prepare for pushback, the inevitable legal challenges, the PR spin. Have your team on standby to issue a statement we acted in the company's best interest. We'll need to control the narrative." She offered a tight smile. "Shauna's already drafting the press release. She'll emphasize integrity over profits. In the meantime, let's focus on shareholder notice. Time is not on our side." She lifted her coffee cup, the dark liquid reflecting the neon flicker. "Black coffee. No sugar." Elliot nodded and scribbled a final line. He slid the completed draft across to her. "Look this over," he said. "If it captures your intent, we sign and seal. Then I'll deliver it personally. This has to reach the boardroom no later than sunrise. Danielle scanned the draft, 3 paragraphs of crisp legal language, each clause anchored by footnoted evidence. Her deft edit here, a tweak there, and the notice transformed into an unassailable declaration. "This is perfect," she said, returning the pad. "Now can we get receipts for server logs? I want timestamp confirmation once it's sent." Elliot tapped his pen thoughtfully. "I'll coordinate with IT. We'll embed a delivery receipt and a PDF proof of delivery. Once they open it, the clock starts." Danielle nodded, slipping the signed draft and the flash drive into her tote. "Then let's wrap this up. I'll head back to the estate one last appearance tomorrow morning before the notice goes live." She stood smoothing her skirt. Elliot closed his briefcase and followed suit. As they made their way to the door, the waitress approached with a check folded into a napkin. Danielle laid cash on the table, dismissing the change. "Keep the rest," she said quietly. Cindy smiled her warm brown eyes, sympathetic, and turned away. Outside, the rain had eased to a mist. The neon sign's glow pooled on the wet gravel. Danielle and Elliot stepped into the damp air, sharing a look of resolute anticipation. Behind them, the diner's warmth remained, but their focus had shifted back to the looming boardroom. The diner's hush dissolved under the street lamp's glare as they separated Danielle toward the estate's looming silhouette, Elliot, toward the flickering headlights of his parked car. In her hand, Danielle clutched both her leather tote and the momentum of their collusion. By dawn, the Bington board would awaken to a legal firestorm. She allowed herself a single private smile, small, confident, unguarded. The $500 million merger had been the bait. Now the real deal was starting, reclaiming control, resetting power, and proving that respect couldn't be orchestrated in a polished dining hall. It had to be earned, and she was about to show the Bingtons precisely how that was done. The polished brass nameplate outside the boardroom read, "Crestwell Holdings," its letters gleaming under the recessed lighting. At precisely 9:58 a.m., Danielle paused on the threshold, adjusting the lapel of her navy blazer, tailored, authoritative, without a hint of concession. She took a slow breath, letting the moment settle. This was the culmination of every late night, every slight endured, every piece of evidence meticulously gathered. A single knock sounded crisp and deliberate. "Come in," called a voice soft with assumption. Danielle pushed open the heavy walnut door and entered, her heels clicking against the herringbone wood floor like an overture. The room fell to a hush, 16 leather-upholstered chairs arranged in a wide oval, each filled by a board member or senior executive, their expressions a blend of surprise and curiosity. At the head of the table sat Thomas Wexler, arms folded, tie loose, scanning her approach with what he thought was confidence. Danielle moved to the seat to his right, her posture unyielding. Beside her, Elliot Miles closed the door and set a leather briefcase on the polished surface. "Good morning," Danielle said, voice clear but not loud enough to carry across the table without a microphone. Charles Banning Curtis's successor as chairman leaned forward. "Danielle, this is unexpected. We were prepared to welcome you as a partner." His tone was measured, but Danielle detected the tremor of uncertainty beneath his practiced calm. Elliot snapped the briefcase open and withdrew a thick stack of documents bound in gray covers stamped with the corporate seal. The room shifted, interest sharpening like the intake of breath before a plunge. Danielle caught Wexler's gaze, his eyes narrowing as he recognized her next move. Elliot laid the papers before her and began in a low, authoritative tone. "These are the amended and restated operating agreement subscription documents and share certificates bearing the signature of Mrs. Danielle Renee Given. They establish her as the majority shareholder as of July 2004 upon her husband's passing." He tapped the top document with a thin finger. "Any later filings purporting to alter that arrangement are subordinate to these original notarized agreements." A murmur rippled around the table as board members exchanged glances. Danielle set her hands on the table, unfolding her notes. "Thank you, Elliot," she said. Then looking directly at Wexler, she continued. "Thomas, Wexler has been operating under the assumption of executive authority, making decisions that jeopardized our company's integrity. Bonuses drawn against safety budgets, unilateral cuts to frontline benefits, and public denigration of our essential staff." Several board members shifted uncomfortably. Wexler's mouth twitched. Danielle's voice remained calm. "Under the same operating agreement as majority shareholder, I call for an immediate vote of no confidence in the current CEO and request the appointment of an interim chair to stabilize leadership. Wexler rose to object, shoulders squared. This is a misunderstanding, Danielle. We have a process, Danielle held up a hand. The process is established by our charter, which grants me this authority. Your objections must be recorded, but they cannot override the clear language of these agreements. She gestured to the documents. If you challenge their validity, the matter will proceed to arbitration, or the court's an outcome we can avoid today by honoring the corporate governance we all agreed to. At the far end of the table, Meredith Chandler, CFO and longtime ally of Wexler, frowned. She opened her binder, scanning some notes. This is unprecedented, she said softly. We'll need time to review. Danielle's eyes met hers. Time is a luxury this company cannot afford. Every day of indecision costs us safety, reputation, and the trust of our people. I'll call for a roll call vote now, and I expect every shareholder to cast their vote here in the room. Charles Ever, the diplomat, cleared his throat. Very well. Let us proceed with the vote. He tapped his gavel, a small wooden mallet, against the table's inlaid oak. All in favor of the resolution. A vote of no confidence in CEO Thomas Wexler, an acceptance of Danielle Given as acting chair until new elections. Please raise your hand. One by one, hands rose. Meredith Chandler hesitated, glancing between Danielle and Charles, then raised her hand. Curtis's protege, seated near the center, followed suit. The director of legal affairs, scrubbed in her black suit, did likewise. Wexler's gaze darted around the table. Few hands remained lowered. Opposed, Charles intoned, steering his gaze to Wexler. A single hand, Wexler's, remained at his side, resolute but isolated. Charles nodded. The vote carries, he announced. By majority, the resolution passes. Wexler's face paled. He straightened his tie, looking as though he'd just risen from a rogues gallery portrait. Danielle's heart softened at that sight, no triumph in his downfall, only a recognition of the fragile armor of assumed power. Elliot rose and placed a hand on the stack of documents. I will prepare the formal minutes and file them with the state. Security, please escort Mr. Wexler from the premises. The two officers at the door had entered quietly at the meeting's start. They stepped forward now in crisp black suits, expressionless. Wexler swallowed, his shoulders tightening. Danielle, this is extreme. My resignation? He paused as one guard approached. Wordlessly, the guard nodded, and another cuff appeared gleaming in the soft overhead light. The boardroom whispered with disbelief as Wexler rose, his posture stiff. Danielle met his gaze not with glee, but with measured compassion. When the cuffs clicked around his wrists, Wexler's single protest. This isn't just about me, dwindled under the echo of leather footsteps. He turned, attempting dignity, but the guards guided him out, door closing with a final resonant thud. Silence reigned once more. Charles cleared his throat and rapped the gavel. As of now, Danielle Given will serve as interim chair and acting CEO. We will convene at 2 o'clock to discuss leadership transition and the formation of a search committee. He offered Danielle a nod of deference, the mantle of authority visibly shifting around the table. Danielle rose smoothly, the warmth of sunlight from the windows catching her profile. She allowed herself a moment to breathe, windows of relief opening in her chest. Thank you, Charles. To all of you, I understand the weight of this change. My first priority is to stabilize operations and restore trust, both within and outside the company. We will address safety audits, frontline pay, and transparent governance. I'll need your cooperation and your expertise. Board members murmured assent, their expressions a mix of tentative hope and residual shock. Danielle turned to Elliot, who passed her the signed minutes. She drew a small, satisfied breath. The room that once tested her belonged to her now. As board members gathered their notes, Danielle slipped on her blazer and returned to her seat, this time at the head of the table. The polished walnut before her reflected the sunrise's glow. No fanfare, no applause, only the quiet resonance of rightful power reclaimed. The empire Wexler had tried to build on assumptions and micro-privileges had given way to governance grounded in principle and justice. Outside, the storm clouds over East Hampton were breaking rays of light splitting the gray expanse. The world beyond these doors would soon know of the boardroom's transformation. But in this chamber, amidst the scent of aged wood and the lingering echoes of decisive action, Danielle Renee. Given sat as interim chair, the architect of her own destiny and the steward of a company reborn under her unwavering resolve. The morning light filtered through the glass atrium as Danielle stepped into the courtyard, a grin tugging at the corners of her lips. 2 days had passed since the boardroom whirlwind, and the air here already felt different. Lighter, charged with possibility. Trucks lined the edge of the gravel lot, a bright red taco truck, a vintage ice cream cart, a black and white coffee van pumping out steam into the crisp air. Bunting stretched between lampposts, fluttering in a gentle breeze that carried the scent of grilled meat and fresh coffee. She paused at the entrance, taking in the scene. Drivers in neon vests clustered near the taco stand, swapping tall tales about broken tailgates and surprise layovers. Administrative staff hovered by the coffee van, clutching lattes and speculating about today's agenda. Custodians, her former colleagues, leaned against their carts, eyes bright with curiosity. For so many years, they'd watched executives breeze past their concerns, falling silent in the hum of office machinery. Today, every one of them was here invited essential. Danielle adjusted her slate-gray blazer, a quiet mark of the leader she'd become, and stepped onto the raised platform she'd had built earlier that week. A single microphone stood before her, feeding into a cluster of portable speakers. Behind her, a banner proclaimed, "Voice inside frontline ideas for a stronger Creswell." A small group of her core team drivers turned event volunteers, a couple of custodial supervisors. The HR manager stood ready with notepads and smiles. She tapped the microphone. A hush rippled through the crowd. Danielle waited, letting their anticipation settle, then began. "Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming." Her voice carried easily across the courtyard. "I want to start by acknowledging something we've all felt: Creswell has not always listened." Murmurs of agreement rose. For too long, decisions were made behind closed doors without the input of the people who keep this company alive every day. Our drivers, our custodians, our administrative staff. That changes now. A driver in a neon vest named Marisol raised her hand. Danielle nodded, inviting her to speak. "I've been hauling freight for 15 years, Marisol said, voice steady. "Sometimes we worked overtime and it never showed up on our checks. We thought it was just how things were." She looked down, then back at Danielle. "Thank you for fixing that." The crowd applauded as Danielle stepped down and hugged her. "I promise retroactive pay," Danielle said, voice firm. "Any unpaid overtime from the last 2 quarters will be on your next paycheck. No forms, no fine print. You did the work, you'll get the pay." Shouts of appreciation echoed as she returned to the microphone. "Next, benefits." She flipped a page on her homemade cue card, simple sheets held together with a clip. "We're restoring meal stipends, expanding our health coverage, and launching mental health support. But I don't want to decide what matters most, you do. Starting next week, HR will host listening sessions in every building. Tell us what you need." A custodial supervisor named Alonzo stepped forward. "Half the warehouse lights flicker, safety hazard," he said. "We've told maintenance, but no fix." Danielle spotted a maintenance manager lurking at the edge of the crowd and waved him over. "Schedule that first," she said, pointing at the manager. "We fix it by tomorrow evening." The manager nodded, eyes wide with relief. Danielle turned back to the mic. "Finally, voice inside our Frontline Ideas Forum. Every month we'll gather suggestions from equipment upgrades to process improvements to how we run safety drills. We'll vote on the best ideas, and I will personally oversee their implementation. Today you can submit your first ideas at the booths over there." She gestured to tables under a striped canopy staffed by interns holding clipboards. Laughter and chatter bloomed as people streamed forward, pens at the ready. Danielle stepped off the platform and mingled, gathering suggestions herself. A receptionist named Dana proposed cross-training so admins could shadow drivers and understand logistics. A warehouse worker suggested a quiet break room away from forklifts. Danielle listened, nodded, and scribbled notes. By mid-morning, the courtyard was a riot of color and conversation. Drivers shared tacos with custodians. Admins clutched friendship bracelets left by a creative intern. The air vibrated with hope. Danielle ducked into the adjacent loading bay where a line of forklift operators waved her over. She knelt beside a chipped control panel and asked, "How can we make this safer?" A veteran operator explained a blind spot near the dock entrance. Danielle promised reflective tape and an extra mirror by day's end. Back outside, she paused to watch a small group gathered around a chalkboard labeled Ideas. Someone had written, better lighting in the parking lot and other monthly town halls in other regions. A third read, air-conditioned break rooms. Danielle traced the words with her finger, her mind racing with schedules and budgets, each entry a thread in the new corporate tapestry. As the sun climbed white tents in the courtyard filled with side dishes, fruit bowls, salad bars, wraps. A DJ spun soft jazz from a corner, blending into the scent of coffee and freshly grilled burgers. Danielle grabbed a water bottle and found a spot near the CEO office window where she could watch the ebb and flow of her colleagues' interactions. She smiled to see drivers giving interns rides on golf carts, custodians comparing notes on non-slip shoes, and HR managers jotting furiously in notebooks. A lull in the music signaled the logistics head stepping to the mic. "Folks, let's thank Ms. Given for this," he said, voice booming. The crowd erupted in applause. Danielle looked down, humbled, and tapped the mic gently. "Thank you," she replied. "But this isn't about me. It's about all of us shaping Creswell's future." She walked into the crowd, shaking hands with warehouse staff as she passed. In the concession line, a young administrative assistant waited nervously with a suggestion form. "Excuse me," she said, voice trembling. "I'm shy, but I think we need better translation services for our non-English speaking teammates." Danielle knelt, took the form, and clapped her hand over the assistant's shoulder. "Brilliant," she said softly. "We'll add a language lab next week." By early afternoon, the town hall drew to a close. Danielle returned to the platform one last time. Today, she said, we showed that leadership isn't a corner office. It's a conversation. It's a meal shared. It's an idea heard. Thank you for making your voices heard. She stepped down and the courtyard erupted in laughter and cheers and the buzz of excited conversations carrying new energy across the estate. Inside the lobby, she bumped into Curtis's old assistant who now worked in HR. The assistant's eyes were bright with uncharacteristic openness. "I've never felt so included," she confessed. Danielle smiled, placing a hand on her arm. "Then our work is just beginning." Later that evening, walking the quiet halls empty of festivities, Danielle paused by a framed photograph in the corridor vintage black and white of Creswell's founding team. She added a sticky note to the frame's corner new chapter, built by all. She tapped the frame gently, a silent promise that the company she'd saved would live up to the name Creswell Growth at every level, cultivated by every voice. Her phone buzzed with messages of thanks from drivers, custodians, and admins. She opened one from Marisol. "Today felt like home. Thank you." Danielle held the phone to her chest, a warmth blooming in her chest. She closed her eyes, breathing in the memory of laughter echoing through the halls. She understood now that rebuilding culture meant more than policies. It meant restoring humanity one conversation at a time and proving that when you listen, leadership follows naturally. The dawn of Sunday arrived pale and tentative over East Hampton, as though the sky itself wasn't certain it wanted to brighten. Danielle stood by the floor-to-ceiling window in the Bington Estate's dining room, now transformed into a breakfast gathering for shareholders. Her reflection framed by the frost-etched panes. The ocean beyond shimmered like a silver mirror, the only constant in a weekend of shifting alliances. Around the mahogany table, framed by gilded moldings and crystal pendants, the Bingtons and their closest board members sat primed to close the $500 million deal. Victoria hovered behind Danielle's chair in a soft blush silk, adjusting the folds of her champagne-colored skirt with mechanical precision. "Everything is set for the announcement," she whispered, voice smooth as lacquer. Danielle offered a small nod, already turning to the assembled faces, Charles Banning seated at the head, his posture regal. Gregory, his loosened tie a testament to last night's excess. Margaret Chandler pensively scanning the deal memo. And a constellation of older gentlemen and women whose fortunes had long been intertwined with the Bington name. Silver platters of smoked salmon and avocado toast circulated, but the air tasted of unspoken tests. Gregory leaned forward, a patronizing archduke. "Danielle," he began, "such a bold weekend. Your energy has been refreshing. But as my mother wisely notes, with $500 million stakes, we need more steadiness. Passion is admirable, but you must understand the importance of measured leadership." His eyes flicked to Danielle's slate gray blazer as if gauging the weight she could carry. Danielle's heartbeat stuttered not from surprise, but from the predictable sting. She met his gaze evenly. Steadiness, she said quietly, is rooted in principle, not in pedigree. She paused, letting the words settle like stones on the table. Gregory's corners of his mouth twitched uncertainty, cracking his bravado. The room shifted, the chandelier's crystals tossing fractured light across stunned faces. Charles cleared his throat, voice velvet, seeking to shore up the moment. Danielle, this is all part of the process. We value your vision, but with a partnership this scale, I appreciate your hospitality, Danielle interrupted softly, and the chance to explore our synergy. But I've come to a decision. She rose the linens, whispering beneath her movement. Chairs scraped as board members straightened, sensing the pivot. Danielle's posture was calm, her eyes bright with unyielding resolve. She leaned forward, palms on the polished wood. Neurospace was founded on two tenets, innovation and integrity. Without both, we are merely chasing profit. I cannot in good conscience proceed with this merger. Her words uttered without a tremor floated across the table like a challenge. The hush that followed felt sacred. Victoria's lips parted in surprise. Gregory's jaw clenched. Margaret's pen hovered above her notepad. Charles stared, the practiced smile crumbling under the weight of authenticity. Danielle, he began, voice tight. You can't do this. This is final stage, our PR cruise. Danielle held up a hand. I'm fully aware. This isn't about money or optics. It's about preserving the DNA of neurospace, which we've built through late nights, principled decisions, and respect for every colleague from intern to IP lead. She met each pair of eyes. If this partnership undermines our values, then I will walk away. Integrity cannot be negotiated. A single nod from her was all that remained. Without another word, she turned and exited the room, the soft click of her heels echoing down the corridor. Behind her, the echoes of stunned murmurs swirled like dust in sunbeams. She navigated the stairwell back to her suite, a space that had felt sterile before now charged with the power of her conviction. Inside the suite, she closed the door and exhaled, feeling the tension drain from her shoulders in a rush of liberation. Her phone buzzed another message from Shauna. Danielle typed, "I've done it." She pressed send and let herself lean against the door, a private smile warming her features. Moments later, her press kit lay spread on the writing desk, a simple podium script, key messages, and a crisp image of the estate's gate symbols now, of refusal rather than acceptance. She picked up her laptop, opened a blank announcement draft, and typed one sentence. After careful consideration, Neurospace will no longer pursue a merger with the Bington Group. She paused, read the words again, then on the next line added, "Integrity cannot be negotiated." With a final tap, she saved the document, not yet hitting send. This message would carry the force of her values into the world. By mid-morning, a plain press room was set up at the East Hampton Community Center, a modest hall with folding chairs and a branded backdrop, Neurospace Integrity and Innovation. A smattering of reporters' cameras and curious locals filed in, drawn by the weekend's buzz. Danielle arrived in a sleek black blazer and tailored trousers, no gown, no extravagance. Her hair pulled back in a low twist. She stood at the podium, the lights focusing like headlights on a highway. Shauna took her place at the side, nodding discreetly. Danielle adjusted the microphone, cleared her throat, and began. Her voice, unamplified, carried every word with crystalline clarity. "Thank you all for coming. I'll keep this brief because clarity doesn't need much time." She paused, letting the room settle into her cadence. After careful consideration, Neurospace will no longer pursue the pending merger with the Bington Group. A few pens tapped frantically. Cameras clicked. This decision is final, and it's not based on legal technicalities or financial calculus. It's based on principle. Integrity cannot be negotiated. Flashbulbs popped like distant fireworks. The murmurs rose into a swell. Reporters leaned forward. Danielle stayed grounded, gaze calm, shoulders even. We built Neurospace to advance human potential. That mission is inseparable from our commitment to respect, inclusivity, and accountability. We will continue to pursue partnerships that honor these values. Thank you. With that, she stepped back from the mic, placing her statement on the podium. No dramatic exit, just a poised pivot, an unspoken dare. The world could respond however it chose, but she would stand by her declaration. As she walked off stage, invitations to questions ricocheted in her wake. She fielded inquiries on market impact and future investors with grace, but her message remained consistent: integrity over shortcuts, vision over validation. Cameras trailed her, broadcasting her resolve in real time to social feeds and global news wires. By the time Danielle reached the lobby of the community center, a small crowd had formed local supporters, curious onlookers, even a few Bington employees who'd slipped away from the estate to witness the upheaval. They greeted her with applause and admiration, recognizing a leader who had chosen principles over profit. Back at Neurospace headquarters in Silicon Valley, employees watched clips on live stream cheering as the words "integrity cannot be negotiated" trended across social media. Investors offered new propositions drawn by the authenticity of her stand. Founders, especially women, and people of color, sent messages of solidarity. "Thank you for showing us we can walk away with our heads held high." That evening, Danielle sat alone in her office's corner lounge, city lights twinkling through the panoramic windows. The day's storm of press and public reaction had subsided into a hum of promising possibilities. She tapped out a final note on her phone. "We did it. Here's to the next chapter." Then she leaned back, the weight of a $500 million handshake lifted, and allowed herself a rare moment of quiet pride. The deal had fallen away, but the deal that truly mattered between her values and her vision remained firm. And in that steadfastness, Danielle understood that true leadership wasn't measured by what you took, but by what you refused to compromise. The sun had barely crested the horizon when Danielle's phone erupted with notifications. Headlines from every major outlet scrolled by Black woman CEO walks from 500 BMR. Deal tech titan chooses principles over profit, integrity over acquisition. Danielle Given's bold stand. Social media was a blaze of praise retweets from industry leaders, video clips of her press briefing looping in feeds, and hashtags like #values. First and integrity cannot be negotiated trending worldwide. By mid-morning, Neurospace headquarters in Palo Alto was buzzing with an energy entirely unlike the usual Monday calm. Employees arriving for work clustered around the lobby's giant video screen, replaying Danielle's announcement, their faces alight with excitement and pride. Some wore white t-shirts emblazoned with the new slogan, "We build, we don't beg," letters bold across the chest. A group of interns in the break room debated which food trucks to book for the upcoming Voice Inside kickoff, an initiative Danielle had unveiled weeks earlier to crowdsource frontline ideas. Even the quietest data analysts exchanged high fives in the hallway. This wasn't just a business victory. It was a moral one. Human Resources had set up a pop-up stand offering complimentary shirts and stickers, and they were flying off the shelves faster than anyone had anticipated. A security guard named Miguel, usually stoic as he scanned badges, now wore his t-shirt under his uniform, grinning as he waved people through the turnstile. "This is what it's all about," he told a colleague, voice trembling with emotion. Finally, someone in power who shows where real leadership lies. Word spread beyond the campus gates. By noon, Danielle was in back-to-back video calls with investors who had hesitated before the Bington merger. One prominent VC known for his skepticism leaned into the camera. "Danielle, I have to admit I underestimated what conviction could do for a brand. We want in. How quickly can we deploy capital?" He didn't need to know that Neurospace's coffers were already flush. He wanted to back the values he'd witnessed. Several mission-aligned funds, women-led, BIPOC-focused Science for Good, followed suit, vying for slots in the cap table. It was as though her act of walking away from a storied legacy had unlocked a floodgate of support for a new kind of enterprise. Meanwhile, back at the East Hampton estate, the Bingtons scrambled. Their carefully choreographed weekend had unraveled in one headline. Press inquiries poured in. They released a terse statement calling Danielle's decision unfortunate, a word that tasted bitter in the mouths of anyone who'd seen her presser. Yet their PR spin couldn't contain the narrative shift. The world knew the true cost of compromising on principle. At Neurospace's weekly all-hands town hall, usually a routine slide deck of metrics and roadmaps, Danielle took the stage wearing a simple cotton blouse and that resilient smile. She surveyed the crowd: engineers, data scientists, customer success reps, facilities staff, and even the lunchtime custodial crew who'd been included in Voice Inside pilots. She didn't need a microphone. Her presence filled the room. "Thank you," she began, voice warm. "I've never been prouder to be part of this family." She paused as the employees erupted in applause, some stamping their feet in a spontaneous ovation. "When we started Neurospace in a public library with nothing but a laptop and a vision, we did it on the belief that technology should serve people, not the other way around. Today, we prove that belief is more valuable than any contract." She pointed to the front row where Maria, a night shift custodian, wiped away a tear. "And for those who said you didn't belong in rooms like this," Danielle continued, "you belong everywhere." After the meeting, employees circulated a petition informally but enthusiastically to rename the campus's main innovation lab the Integrity Hub. The naming committee found it hard to refuse. On Wednesday, a sleek plaque replaced the old one, Neurospace Integrity Hub, in brushed steel letters. Later that afternoon, Danielle met with the leadership team to discuss the latest proposal, the Dyson Institute's co-development offer. They wanted to apply Neurospace's autonomous data algorithms to emergency response systems in urban hospitals, a perfect blend of social impact and commercial application. Shauna Kim, her CFO, spread the term sheet on the conference table. Danielle reviewed it once, then said, "They agree to our structure, no equity dilution, full control over IP. It aligns perfectly." Shauna beamed. "Then let's build it," Danielle affirmed, tapping her pen on the table as though committing a covenant. That evening, Danielle returned to her office, overlooking the bay's gentle waves under the setting sun. A message from a young founder scrolled across her screen. "Thank you for showing us we can walk away with our heads high." She read it twice, then stared out the window at the city light shimmering on the water. Behind her, a whiteboard bore the words she'd written days ago. "We build, we don't beg." She placed her hand on the board as though steadying a compass. The next 48 hours would be a whirlwind of announcements and partnerships. Yet in this moment of calm, Danielle understood the true legacy she was forging, a blueprint for every leader who learns that power is not in fitting a mold, but in shaping a new one. And for every person who's ever been told to shrink in a room they earned their place in, she had proven that sometimes the most revolutionary act is simply standing firm. As the lights dimmed in her office, Danielle closed her laptop and tapped a final note into her personal journal. "Greatness isn't measured by how much you can take, it's measured by how much you're willing to uphold." She then stood smoothing her blazer and walked out into the night, leaving the glow of her legacy to illuminate every path yet to be built.